As a creative aspect, TV is one of the best things that we do as a species. Along with music and film and books, they bring out the best creative of all of us. They entertain and they bring so much joy to many. They invoke emotion and enable us to feel things that we bury sometimes deep down. That's what this podcast is for. Welcome to A Million Little TV Shows. This is what I call the breakdown while I break down. Each week I will go through a different TV show, a different season of that TV show, and different episodes of that show. And I will break down not only emotions, but I will break down stories from my life, and let you know why these TV shows mean so much to me, and why I believe that they are some of the most important shows out there. This podcast is here to highlight a lot of smaller TV shows, or TV shows that don't really get a platform, because we know of a bunch of TV shows that get a multitude of different podcasts. Ted Lasso, Game of Thrones, The Office, they've all got several podcasts out there analysing all types of different things. But there's not many out there for the little guy, and that's what I'm trying to highlight. So each week I will go through a different show, different seasons, different episodes, and I will go across all different kinds of genres and different countries to bring you what I believe is some of the best TV out there. So I'm glad you're here with me. I'm glad you're here for this journey. And if you've watched the shows before and you wanted to come here and get an analysis on them and have someone go through them and pick out bits that you might have enjoyed, then I'm glad you are here. If, however, you have never watched the show and you just want to come and have someone talk in your ear about different TV shows, I'm glad you are here. But I hope that it inspires some people to go and seek out these TV shows. They deserve to be watched. They were made with love and care, and they are the same as this podcast, made with love and care. I am your host, Mike, and I will take you through every adventure, every horror, every piece of drama, and I hope that you enjoy the show. Hello there, and welcome back to this A Million Little TV Shows podcast. This is now episode 5 of season 13, and as always I cannot wait to get into today's episode because we are revisiting the Bates Motel. Now, as I've said before, this series is so electrifying and it is just one of my favourite shows of all time, I think. I've spoken before about my love of things like the films like Psycho by Alfred Hitchcock and, other films like Silence of the Lambs, which I've obviously covered, Hannibal previously. Now, I always like to find some shows that kind of go around that lore and explore it a bit more. Now, this is an interesting show because it starts as a show where Norman Bates is a lot younger and obviously his mother is around. But also, as I said in the last episode, with us losing Cody so quickly, who was a girl in his life, and we've also lost Bradley Martin, who was another girl in his life, we can see why Norman kind of goes the way that he does with his mistrust of women. And maybe that the mother persona that he puts on is actually to protect himself against being hurt again, and that may be why he ends up doing what he does to Marion Crane in the film. I believe the name was Marion Crane. If I'm wrong, then I'm sure someone will pick me up on that. But I really want to explore more of this show, and I just think it's an incredible way to do it, because this franchise was something that I grew up with. Someone who is from the 80s will probably be in the same boat. They will have grown up with this, and maybe this show is a good nostalgia piece for them. I know it certainly was for me. Anyway, enough rambling. Let's get into the episode. So, this is Bates Motel, Season 2, Episodes 8 to 10. Episode 8, Meltdown, and most of this episode certainly was. We'll start out with Dylan. So, after everything that had gone down with Zane breaking into the warehouse and killing a bunch of Ford's people, Ford is now on the warpath. He goes and sees Norma and tells her, "Can you arrange a meeting with Dylan?" She feels a little bit odd about this because obviously now Dylan has moved out and he doesn't really want much to do with her. But Ford convinces her to go and speak to him. When she does, however, Dylan really doesn't want to have anything to do with her, and he certainly doesn't want to go to speak to Nick Ford. However, Nick eventually comes back and tells Norma that she really needs to speak to him and get Dylan to get in contact with him, because if Dylan doesn't, things could go bad for Norma and her family. Eventually, Dylan gives him a call and they suggest a meet-up. However, Dylan knows that things could go south, so he arranges to meet him in a public place and outside of town so that nothing gets back to anyone who Dylan currently works for. When he meets Nick, Nick essentially tells him, look, I run this town and you are probably better off being on my side than on their side. He tells him to kill Zane because if he doesn't, the Bates family is probably going to be in danger. Now, Zane is an absolute fucking nutcase and could potentially do something bad towards Dylan, but Nick Ford's more calculating. And him saying that the family will be in danger, I'd be more inclined to listen to what Nick's got to say. But Dylan is literally between a rock and a hard place here. Now when Dylan goes to see Jodie, Jodie basically tells him the same thing. Do what you have to do when it comes to Zane. And so she's even feeling the pinch a little bit. She doesn't want this whole thing going off, and she doesn't certainly want a gang war. She just wants Nick to do what he needs to do and their family to do what they need to do. And if that means getting rid of Zane, then so be it. After everything with his blackouts, Norman is now refusing to talk to Norma. He's cordial, he'll give one-word answers, but he'll generally walks away. He doesn't want to stay in the room with her, which is something that they've never had before. But because she won't give him any idea of what goes on in these blackouts, and he really wants to know, he decides to keep walking away from her, including locking himself in the basement, locking himself in the bedroom, whenever she is in the house. She keeps suggesting that they do things together, and he's just not bothered. So you can see that this situation has started to cause a strain on their relationship. But when Norma confronts him on this, he also confronts her. He tells her that the lies between them have changed their relationship and that he cannot do this anymore. And he ends up storming off upstairs and hiding in his room. He locks himself in there, and the dolly door between the two of them, he locks that too. And so now Norma is pissed, because that very night she'd actually gone out for a date with George, and when she got to George's house, expecting Norman to be up in arms about her going, he had essentially just let her leave, because he believed that it would be best for their relationship if she went off and did whatever she needed to with George. However, she comes back and they get into it. This is where Norman locks himself in his bedroom and she decides, fuck it, I don't care anymore, I'm just going to go. She walks out the door, she goes back to George's place, and the two have sex. As for Romero, after what he found out in the last episode, with the fact that Norman's semen was found in Blair Watson, his old teacher who died in the last series, obviously now there is a massive connection to Norman in this case. He doesn't know how to actually talk to Norman about this, but eventually he just confronts him outright. It turns out that the man who had been convicted of her murder, Kyle Miller, is already going to jail for this, so, well, he just kind of thinks, what would it hurt if I knew the answer? He's told his deputy not to say anything, and he is certainly not going to say anything to anyone else, but he wants to know what Norman knows about what happened that night, and he just wants the truth. But when he confronts Norman about this, Norman runs. He runs back up to the house, and immediately after he walks in, he hears a noise. He comes downstairs expecting it to be Mother, but of course Mother is at this point in George's bed. As he gets to the bottom of the stairs, all of a sudden a gag comes over his mouth and Norman passes out, and essentially he is abducted by someone. Episode 9, The Box. After a night with George, Norma finally returns home. However, when she gets back, she can't find Norman anywhere. Now, with the situation that these two have had, she thinks that he is playing games. She searches the house, she searches the basement, she searches down at the motel. She can't find him anywhere. She speaks to Emma, and Emma has no idea where he is either. But when Emma asks if there's anything that she can do or if there's any way that she can help, she's told basically to leave it. Emma just keeps getting annoyed and keeps getting thrown out of any conversation that she's having. And this comes back to bite Norma in the ass later on because, well, Emma's getting a little bit pissed off with this. Anytime that there is something going on in the motel, they won't speak to her about it. She thought that she was part of the family, she felt like she was part of the family, and now both Norma and Norman keep shutting her out. So she goes to speak to Norma later on in the episode and essentially hands in her notice. She's sick of not being included in anything, even though she will keep it to herself, whatever it is. She just wants to help, she just wants to know what's going on, so that she's not left out of the loop. Norman, however, is nowhere to be found, because he is in the middle of a field in a metal box, hence the title of the episode. And of course, he's been put there by Nick Ford. Nick gives a call to Norma and basically tells her, look, you need to do what is best for your son right now and get your other son, Dylan, to go and do what he needs to do. Norma has no idea what this means, but she needs to get hold of Dylan. She goes over to where Dylan works and speaks to her about this. However, Norma is all gung-ho. She basically says, look, I will do whatever it takes to get him back. I will come and help you out with whatever you need to do. Because if Dylan doesn't do what Ford needs him to, then Norman is going to die in that tiny box. Dylan ends up going over to speak with Jodie and tells her that the situation is pretty dire. He needs some way out of this, and he needs to go and find where Zane is, and he needs to kill him. So if she knows anything, she needs to tell him now. She does, and he ends up going to find him, but when he gets there, well, the man's armed to the teeth. He knows that people are coming for him. He knows that Ford is coming after him, and so why wouldn't he be guarded at some point? And so now Dylan has to go and try and make nice with one of the more ruthless people in town. However, by this point, Nick has already found something very interesting out about Norman, because Norman has actually been found with a pearl necklace on him. And Nick Ford recognises this pearl necklace. He knows that it's Blair's, and that is his daughter. And so he now knows that potentially Norman was around her when she died. While in this box, Norman is trying to replay over in his head that night and what happened. And of course he thinks about what happened between the two of them. He knows that they definitely had sex, but was still kind of unsure as to whether he was the one who actually killed her, or just whether he blacked out or not. We know that he's got evidence from that night, but there's still no definitive answer as to whether he killed her. Even though, in his blacked out state, he believes that he sliced her throat while they were having sex. But his memory of this could be unreliable. Dylan ends up going to see Ford and tells him, look, I can't kill Zane. He's too well armed, and if I went up there with an army or a bunch of people, I'd happily go do it, but right now, I can't. And Ford basically tells him, look, I'll just deal with it. Dylan wants to know where Norman is, but Ford won't give up the location, and therefore he and Dylan get into it. Dylan ends up knocking the old man out and manages to take him down, but he inadvertently kills him at the same time, and he has no idea where Norman is. So now Norman is trapped in his box, and the only people that know where he is are the henchmen of Ford, who's now dead. As for the sheriff, he is trying to find out what happened to Blair Watson on that night. He goes and speaks to someone who runs polygraph tests and tells him, I know it's inadmissible in court, but I don't care. I just want to know whether he did it or whether he understands that he did it. This man tells him that he'll help him out, and when Romero goes to speak to Norma, he tells her that Norman had sex with Blair Watson on the night that she died. But all Norma can think about right now is the fact that Norman isn't there. She keeps telling Romero as much, but he obviously won't listen. And then she has to tell him where he is. And she blurts out that he's been kidnapped by Ford, and she has no idea where his actual location is. And finally, for this season of Bates Motel, episode 10, The Immutable Truth. So now that Romero has found out where Norman is, or at least who has Norman, he goes to see Ford. However, the only person that he finds there is one of his henchmen and, of course, Dylan. Romero manages to convince this man to tell him exactly where Norman is because, well, it's all over. This guy is literally looting a safe at this point, and he has no boss. So he might as well just give up the location, and then Romero and Dylan can go find Norman. He does, and that's exactly what happens. They manage to find him, and Norman ends up in hospital. While he's there, he tells Norma about what happened with Blair Watson, or at least what his dream told him had happened. But of course, she is once again in full denial of all of this and tells him basically to just keep it on the down low. Don't tell anyone, just don't think about it, and just try and rest up a bit. But because of everything that's been going on around Norman, Romero keeps insisting that he takes his polygraph test. It's not going to mean anything other than it's going to give Romero something to hang on to, because he isn't convinced that he sent the right person to jail, and this will just be for his own peace of mind. But again, Norma says that this can't happen. She's not willing to put Norman under that kind of strain. And then Norman is allowed to go home. Once he gets there, he has a list of things that he is checking off throughout the episode. Things like packing up his taxidermy stuff, but also he goes and speaks to Emma. He tells her about what happened with Norma and the reason that they have been so quiet lately and so dismissive of her because they didn't want her involved in any of this. He also tells her about the fact that Dylan's dad is potentially Norma's brother. Now, again, it's disputed, but we obviously know Norma's history. And the fact that Dylan and Caleb look very, very similar, it is very odd. But this list that Norman has put together looks like something someone who was about to commit suicide would actually do. He's making amends for things and he is putting things straight. He doesn't, however, tell his mother about this, but he does give her one last dance because that is something that they always enjoyed doing together, especially around the kitchen, and he just wants her to have that final memory of him. But Norman knows where the gun is in the house and he takes it and takes the bullets out of his mother's drawer. And so it would seem that he has every intention of killing himself. As for Romero, he now knows that he has to do something about Zane. He and Dylan go back to Jodie's and they convince her of the same thing. They get her to call Zane and get him to come down to where she is so that Romero can arrest him, or at least that's what she believes. When Zane arrives on the property, Romero goes out to meet him, but all we hear is gunfire outside. Jodie then goes downstairs and tries to reason with her brother, but her brother won't have any of it, and she ends up lashing out at him, striking him with a knife, and he just comes back with 2 bullets to the chest. All while Dylan stands watching. Everything just happens so quickly that he can't react quick enough. But once Jodie is down, Romero turns up and tells him exactly what he said in the previous episode. He said that he would regret what he did to Romero's house, and he kills Zane there and then. Romero and Dylan start to discuss what happened, and he basically tells him exactly what happened. He says that he found out that Zane had gone over to Ford's house and killed him, and then he came over to Jodie's house to find out where Zane was, but Zane was already here. Jodie was dead, and it came down to him or me, and Romero decided that it was going to be Zane who was taken out. Dylan asks about what he was doing in this role, and Romero tells him, nothing, you weren't even here. Don't worry about it. Dylan asks Romero why he's getting a free pass out of this, and, well, Romero tells him, look, go and speak to your mother. I need her to do something for me. I need her to do this polygraph test, or at least Norman to do it, but she isn't having any of it. Please go and convince her that he needs to do something because he's dangerous, or at least I believe he's dangerous, and therefore this isn't good for him right now. We need to be able to contain this, whatever it is. Norma, however, has decided that she wants to run. She's told Dylan that they're going to move away and that she has organised him to come with them. She wants him back in her life, and after everything that's happened and all the mess that he came out of, she can't understand why such an amazing person came out of what happened between her and her brother, but she's pleased to have him in her life and she loves him. He tells her, look, we need to sort something out with Norman. We can't just go running, we need to find out what's happening. And this whole thing that Romero has set up, this polygraph test, will give us at least a good indication of what happened. And especially after the fact that Norma managed to find Norman when she came back to the house. She found him wandering out in the woods with this gun. At one point he fell and the gun went off and she thought she'd lost him. She tells him she never wants to lose him, she absolutely loves him, and it's meant to be him and her forever. And it's here we get a very awkward moment when she kisses him full on the lips as if he were a lover and not her son. There's always been a wonder about the two of them, and it seems to be clarified in this moment that there is a potential sexual connection between the two of them. But once she's back at the house and she's speaking to Dylan, she understands. Norma and Dylan end up taking Norman to go and see about this polygraph test. Once they get there, they ask the basic questions and then they start getting into more serious questions about what happened with Blair Watson that night. He confesses to sleeping with her, but when the question of who murdered her came up, as in, did you murder Blair Watson, Norman stops. His mother is sat next to him, even though we know that she's out in the hall, and she basically tells him exactly what happened. That Norman didn't kill her, but Norma did. And so when the question is asked again and Norman answers no, we realise that that part of him that is Norma was the one that killed Blair Watson. And now he's managed to pass a polygraph test because he believes, as Norman, that it wasn't him who did anything. And so now Romero has the answer that he needs, that it wasn't Norman and that he sent the right man to jail. Norma can keep hold of her son and she doesn't have to send him off to some psych ward because, well, he's perfectly fine. And they can finally get on with living their life. And now that Norma is on the town council, even though she has fallen out with both Christine and George, because she told George in the last episode basically to go fuck himself, they now have a place in town where they can actually continue and thrive. But all the while we know and we see something deep and dark within Norman. For instance, we get a very ominous shot of him at the end of the episode where he is looking down and then he looks into the camera. And it's a very similar shot to the one that was done in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho with Norman Bates in that. And he basically tells them how he wouldn't harm a fly. And then he looks at the screen as if to say, I wouldn't. And so we can now see the basis of Norman Bates from the Psycho film right here at the end of this season. And so that wraps us up for season 2 of Bates Motel. And we can see a lot of interesting things coming for the future. Now Norman knows that he can lie convincingly because of this other persona taking over. And that means that he doesn't have to think about any of the bad things that he's done. All that's going to happen is that other persona has taken over and he doesn't have to think about it again. So things like him killing his dad, which we have a potential of, and now him killing Miss Watson. And don't forget that he also killed Cody's dad, but we'll forget about that one for now because it was kind of an accident. But every time he ducks out, there's potential there that he may end up doing something bad. So this is very interesting. As for Norma, she gets to keep her baby boy and she gets to ignore what is happening. She gets to sweep it under the rug, and of course that isn't exactly the best idea because, well, we know what happens to Norman Bates, and therefore having him not be able to answer for his own crimes because he can blame this other persona, which ends up being his mother, it just doesn't seem right. And potentially that could come back to bite her in the ass when he's asked any questions. If he's asked if it was his mother that did this, then he could turn around and say, yes, it was, because he believes that it is. As for Dylan, it's suggested by Romero that he take over the full operation for all the drugs that are in town, because that way Dylan can work with the sheriff's department, people still get drugs, and it's not a major issue anymore. And if he builds up like the other two did and manages to keep everything under wraps, then it shouldn't be such a big issue anymore. And if the sheriff's department and the main drug lord in town are working together, then that's ideal. Because at least then Romero knows that he can just manipulate Dylan into whatever he wants. As for Emma, I think that she's grown exponentially throughout this season. And the fact that she could finally speak her mind and talk to both Norman and Norma about what happened and why she is not included in anything that goes on in that house. She's not entitled to it, but she feels like she is family. And I can understand her frustration at the fact that she feels that way. And I would as well. If you felt like you were being kept out of the loop about something, it's not exactly fair when you are so entrenched in it. And so it makes perfect sense for Emma to do what she's doing. And then we get to Romero. Now, we know that Nestor Carbonell actually became a main character in this season as Sheriff Romero, whereas the first season he was just a recurring, so we know that he got more of an elevation in this season than he did before. And it just proves that he's going from strength to strength in the next few seasons, probably working with Dylan and potentially being a love interest for Norma, because he is very protective of the family. And so we're going to get to see how that goes as well. But so far, 2 absolutely excellent seasons of TV, and I cannot praise it enough. I absolutely loved watching both of them again. I find Norma and Norma sometimes a little bit grating, but the only reason for that is because that's how they're meant to be. And I cannot wait to get into season 3. But obviously that is going to be coming in season 14 for the podcast, and I've already planned out when I'm actually reviewing them. It's going to be the same episodes as it was this time. So episodes 1, 3 and 5 of season 14, and yeah, I'm looking forward to it. But for now, I'm done. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Please like, share, subscribe, all that good shit. But until next time, I will speak to you soon. Bye. As always, thank you for listening to this podcast, and you could really help me and the podcast by giving a like, share, subscribe on all major platforms that you listen to podcasts on. As an independent podcaster, this will just help me exponentially when it comes to actually doing more things with this podcast. I truly do enjoy this, and I absolutely love revisiting these TV shows with you guys. So any engagement from you is always welcome, and I will try and listen to all of you when you give suggestions or just tell me what you think about the podcast. But once again, thank you for listening, and until next time, I will speak to you soon. Bye.